Rajendra Prasad, Breej Kishore Babu, Maulana Mazharul Haq, and several other prominent lawyers had arrived from Bihar. They conferred with Gandhi. What would they do if he was sentenced to prison? Gandhi asked. Why? The senior lawyer replied. They had come to advise and help him. If he went to jail, there would be nobody to advise and they would go home. What about the injustice to the sharecroppers? Gandhi demanded. The lawyers withdrew to consult. So the lawyers answered that if Gandhi wouldn't have been involved, if Gandhi would have been in prison, they would have left. So they are basically here for Gandhi. They did not come here after empathizing and understanding the injustice that was given to the sharecroppers. And Gandhi was particularly angry about this fact that the lawyers were there because of him and not to give justice to the sharecroppers. So finally, when he asked this out of anger, what about the injustice to the sharecroppers? Why was Gandhi there at Champaran? In order to be by the side of the stakeholders of the sharecroppers. The lawyers withdrew to consult. Rajendra Prasad has recorded the upshot of their consultations. They thought amongst themselves that Gandhi was totally a stranger, and yet he was prepared to go to prison for the sake of the peasants. And if they, on the other hand, being not only residents of the adjoining districts, but also those who claim to have served these peasants, should go home, it would be shameful desertion. So they understood the fact that Gandhi was here to help the peasants, and they should also be here to help the peasants, to give them justice, and not to be by the side of Gandhi, but to be by the side of the sharecroppers. They accordingly went back to Gandhi and told him they were ready to follow him even into jail. The battle of Champaran is won, he exclaimed. Why? Because he made the lawyers understand the real reason they were here united. So finally, he understood that now the battle of Champaran can be won because the lawyers have understood the proper reason they were here for. Then he took a piece of paper and divided the group into pairs and put down the order in which each pair was to court arrest. Several days later, Gandhi received a written communication from the magistrate informing him that the lieutenant governor of the province had ordered the case to be dropped. Civil disobedience had triumphed the first time in modern India. So finally, after days of trials and tribulations, they got success. What success? Lieutenant Governor of the province had messaged Gandhi that to drop the case because they are ready and they are going to make amendments. What amendments did the Lieutenant Governor order? Let us see. So civil disobedience had won victory for the first time. Gandhi and the lawyers now proceeded to conduct a far-flung means deeper inquiry into the problems and the complaints and the grievances of the farmers. Depositions by about 10,000 peasants were written down. Please underline all the lines that I have underlined. And notes made on other evidence. Documents were collected. The whole area throbbed means crowded with the activity of the investigators and the protest from the part of the landlords. In June, Gandhi was summoned to Sir Edward Gate, the Lieutenant Governor. Before he went, he met leading associates and again laid detailed plans for civil disobedience if he should not return. Gandhi had 4 protracted interviews with the Lieutenant Governor, and finally what happened? He appointed an official commission for the inquiry into the Indigo sharecroppers' situation. The commission consisted of underlined landlords, government officials, and Gandhi as the sole representative of the peasants. Gandhi remained in Champaran for an initial uninterrupted period of 7 months and then again for several shorter visits. The visit, casually undertaken on the request of an unlettered peasant, that is, Mr. Shukla, in the expectation that it would last a few days, turned out to be almost a year of Gandhi's life. The official inquiry assembled a crushing mountain of evidence against the big planters, and when they saw this, they agreed in principle to make refunds to the peasants. But how much must we pay? They asked Gandhi. They thought that Gandhi is going to demand the repayment of the full money that they had illegally and deceitfully, illegally means unlawfully, and deceitfully means foolishly, deceiving, betraying someone, foolishly extorting out the money, deceitfully extorted from the sharecroppers. He asked only 50%. They were astonished. They expected that he is going to demand the full money, but he asked only 50%. There he seemed adamant. Writes Reverend J. Z. Hodge, a British missionary in Champaran, who observed the entire episode at close range. Thinking probably that he would not give way, the representative of the planters offered to refund to the extent of 25%. And to his amazement, Mr. Gandhi took him at his word, thus breaking the deadlock. So, there was, a hassle. Gandhi demanded 50% and the landlords told that they will repay 25%, but Gandhiji agreed. What was the reason? This settlement was adopted unanimously by the commission. Gandhi explained that the amount of the refund was less important than the fact that the landlords had been obliged to surrender part of the money and part of their prestige. So here money is negligible. The money is negligible because the time that had been wasted, the deceit that had been done to the peasants could not be repaid back. But the fact that the landlords surrendered to the native people and surrendered their prestige and some part of their money is itself a victory. Therefore, as far as the peasants were concerned, the planters had behaved as lords above the law. Now the peasant saw that he had rights and defenders. He learned courage. Events justified Gandhi's position. Within a few years, the British planters abandoned their estates, which reverted to the peasants. Indigo sharecropping disappeared. So finally, the British planters abandoned and everything was reverted to the peasants, and indigo sharecropping, the full issue stopped. Gandhi never contented himself with large political or economic solutions. He saw the cultural and social backwardness in the Champaran villages and wanted to do something about it immediately. He appealed for teachers. The first thing that he thought should be done in that villages which was full of illiterate peasants who even could not conjecture their position. Only education could bring them to understand their position and what should they do or do not, or they should not do. So first thing, he thought of teaching the villagers the basic things. He appealed for teachers. Mahadev Desai, Narahari Parikh, two young men who had just joined Gandhi as disciples, and their wives volunteered for the work. Several more came from Bombay, Pune and other distant parts of the land. Devdas, Gandhi's youngest son, arrived from the ashram, and so did Mrs. Gandhi. Primary schools were opened in 6 villages. Kasturbai taught the ashram rules on personal cleanliness and community sanitation. Health conditions were also miserable in those villages. Gandhi got a doctor to volunteer his services for 6 months. 3 medicines were available: castor oil, quinine and sulfur ointment. Anybody who showed a coated tongue was given a dose of castor oil. Anybody with malaria fever received quinine plus castor oil. Anybody with skin eruptions received ointment plus castor oil. Gandhi noticed the filthy state of women's clothes. They were so dirty, they did not get proper place and sanitization. He asked Kasturbai to talk to them about it. One woman took Kasturbai into her hut and said, "Look, there is no box or cupboard here for clothes. The sari I am wearing is the only one I have." During his long stay in Champaran, Gandhi kept a long distance watch on the ashram. He sent regular instructions by mail and asked for financial accounts. Once he wrote to the residents that it was time to fill in the latrine trenches and dig new ones, otherwise the old ones would begin to smell bad. So he also focused on the hygiene and sanitation of the villages. So he focused on the overall development of the poor peasants and the villagers. The Champaran episode was a turning point in Gandhi's life. What I did was a very ordinary thing. I declared that the British could not order me about in my own country. But Champaran did not begin as an act of defiance. It grew out of an attempt to alleviate. Alleviate means to reduce the distress. Distress means the pitiful condition of large number of poor peasants. Peasants means farmers. This was the typical Gandhian pattern. His politics was closely intertwined, mixed with the practical day-to-day problems of the millions. His was not a loyalty to abstractions, it was a loyalty to living human beings. So you see, he was not only a politician for the betterment of the country, for a dream to make an utopian state, but his politics was greatly involved with the loyalty and love, with the upgradation of the livelihood of the native poor people, the human beings. In everything Gandhi did, moreover, he tried to mold a new free Indian who could stand on his own feet and thus make India free. So you see, he not only found solution to problems but empowered people to fight those problems themselves in case he was not available. So basically he taught about self-reliance. Only self-reliance can bring Indian independence, because one man like Gandhi cannot bring independence, but many self-reliant individuals, Indian individuals, can only bring Indian independence together. Early in the Champaran action, Charles freed and Roos, the English pacifist, who had become a devoted follower of the Mahatma, came to bid Gandhi farewell before going on to a tour duty to the Fiji Islands. Gandhi's lawyer friends thought it would be a good idea, a lawyer's idea, to keep an Englishman beside them, for Andrews to stay in Champaran and help them. Andrews was willing if Gandhi agreed, but Gandhi was vehemently opposing this. Why? You think that that in this unequal fight it would be helpful if we have an Englishman on our side? This shows the weakness of your heart. The cause is just and you must rely upon yourselves to win the battle. You should not seek a prop in Mr. Andrews because he happens to be an Englishman. So the lawyers thought that if we keep an Englishman, the battle will be easy. But Gandhi opposed. Gandhi told that our reason, we are by the side of Satya, we are by the side of truth, and the truth itself is the only reason to win the battle. So we do not need an excuse in the form of an Englishman to stay by our side to win this battle. We have to be self-reliant and we have to be fearless at heart to approach a cause that is just and impartial and fair. He had read our minds correctly, Rajendra Prasad comments, and we had no reply. Gandhi in this way taught us a lesson in self-reliance. Self-reliance, Indian independence, and help to sharecroppers were all bound together. Thank you, students. Read your text minutely, line by line. Then only you will be able to answer all the questions, all the intriguing questions easily.